He's been called one of the greatest artists of all time.
If my shit does have some type of mass appeal to it, then that's good. You know what I'm saying? It reaches a wider audience, but I don't try to compromise myself for nobody.
And the best rapper in the world.
Jay-Z, Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, those people that people mentioned, none of them, not even close, had the sort of impact that he did.
One of music's most controversial performers, he's caused offense with everyone from Christina Aguilera to President George W. Bush.
I love the media. I thank God for the media because you guys give me shit to talk about.
He was like almost like a Siri. He was a voice. He was the only one that was actually kind of telling the truth.
Always making headlines. He's married the same woman twice and being sued by his mother.
Is he a violent person? Is he a bad husband? Is he still an addict or an alcoholic? A real-life soap opera, for lack of a better term.
He is the poet of his generation, and he's sold over 86 million albums to prove it.
It's impossible to copy. You can't clone that guy. You can't be a derivative white rapper. No one can even touch the guy.
In a world of manufactured pop and manufactured rock, this was a true artist.
He is the king of hip-hop, a wordsmith extraordinaire. He is Eminem. Born Marshall Bruce Mathers III on October 17, 1972, in St. Joseph, Missouri, his childhood was not an easy one.
I think the best way to describe his environment is grim. It was poor. It was trailer trash. His words, not mine. It was incredibly an impoverished way to grow up.
His grandmother was, allegedly abused by her mother, which would be his great-grandmother. So he's got this dysfunctional family.
And it seems history repeated itself when Marshall's mother, Debbie, married Marshall's dad, Bruce Marshall Mathers II, in 1970. In 1972, the family moved to North Dakota, and Bruce took over the family business. But it appears Bruce Mathers II was a difficult character. Life in the Mathers household was very volatile, and after many months of fighting and instability, Debbie moved back to Missouri, while Bruce took off to California. It's alleged that he was never heard of again. Marshall was only 18 months old. It was an abandonment that would have a serious impact on the rest of his life.
For the young Eminem, for Marshall Mathers, the abandonment by his father at an early age left him with a sense that the male into whose care he was entrusted did not think highly enough of him to stick around and make sure he was okay. So one of the defining and most important relationships in Eminem's life was his relationship with his mother, Debbie.
Eminem has never painted a pretty picture of his mom, Debbie Mathers. He's called her a pill popper. He said she was unreliable, that she was never around, that she dated the wrong kind of guys.
Marshall and his mother, Debbie, moved between various towns, including St. Joseph, Savannah, Kansas City, and Warren, Michigan. He has said it was like we were always starting over.
Every few months he's moving from place to place, and he's got no stability in his family life, no anchor where he can sit down and say, this is who I am, this is where I live, this is my part of the world.
The following years proved very unstable for Marshall. He changed schools every 2 to 3 months.
One of the things that's most disturbing for children is when they move from place to place, they're always making new peer groups. They're always having to get to know people all over again. When you go into a peer group as a new kid, you always start at the bottom of the pack, and then you've got to fight your way up. And because he had many disadvantages in that battle, 1, he was white, 2, he was small, he was timid, he was introverted, he was an artist, he was all those things. He was never going to make it or be accepted in the groups into which he was thrust.
Eventually, Debbie and Marshall settled in Detroit, a city charged with racial tension. Only a few years earlier, race riots had wreaked havoc on parts of Detroit. Now, Marshall found himself one of the only white kids in a predominantly black school.
You know, he was a victim of kind of reverse racism. His peer group was not one in which he could belong. He was a white kid in a black neighborhood. So you've got nowhere for him to go. And once a boy loses his male role model, well, then the peer group is the substitute. And what did his peer group do to him? Ostracized him.
Marshall was a loner as a child and was said to have been hyperactive and medicated on the ADHD drug Ritalin. As a kid, Marshall got lost in the comic book world of superheroes, and he loved drawing his own creations. But he had a very tough time in school.
Eminem was in a sort of situation where he was constantly struggling. He was struggling at school. He was bullied tremendously. He was struggling to be heard at home. So all of those things came to a head in his teen years. They were incredibly formative years because they helped create the superstar rapper that we all know today, and that was all born of those years. But at the same time, it was like, it was a constant battle. It was a battle with his own inner demons. It was a battle with people outside, and it was literally physical fights with kids that he knew.
Bullying can be devastating for a child, and for the adult that child becomes everybody wants to belong, and the person who's bullied is being told physically and emotionally that you don't belong here. And not only do you not belong here, we are going to punish you simply for who and what you are.
Then things took a very dark turn.
It reached the point where in the famous song he wrote called Brain Damage, where he talks about the guy who literally put him in a coma. It could have killed him. But the beatings didn't stop there, they just carried on. When he recovered from his coma, it just carried on. It wasn't as if he was subject to isolated acts of bullying. It was sustained bullying over an entire childhood, right through his teenage years. And that's where his creativity comes from. That's where his artistry comes from. It's the person he met when he turned away from the world and looked inside to try and find some anchor and some way of making sense of this craziness into which he was born and in which he was growing up.
Debbie's youngest brother, Ronnie Nelson, who was the same age as Marshall, introduced him to hip-hop when he was only 11 years old. It was music that would change his life forever.
I've been writing lyrics since I was like 14 years old, you know, and just the more I wrote, the better I kept getting at it.
Before Eminem, you know, there had been white rappers. Third Base was a popular white rapper. Beastie Boys were popular white rappers. But for the most part, well, the white rapper had been a novelty.
His uncle Ronnie, who he was very, very close to, and he introduced them to music like Beastie Boys' License to Ill.
White, not black. You might not believe me, but it is like that. When you come to my show, watch me go.
Be honest. Thank you.
He was also into like Two Live Crew and, you know, some of the rappers that were coming up in the late 80s and early 90s. One of his biggest influences was NWA and Dr. Dre. You know, Dr. Dre, who he ended up working with and continues to work with. You know, his exposure to this guy who would end up being his mentor was also just his exposure to the genre in general.
But in 1988, life changed drastically for Marshall when Kimberly Scott entered his life. His mother, Debbie, had always wanted a daughter, and when the chance came to foster Kim, Debbie grabbed it with both hands. But it was a decision she was soon to regret.
His mother describes the rows that he used to have and the fights he used to have with Kim when they were growing up. And she said, but he never laid a finger on her. He would go out, she said, and he would punch the car. And she said that car had so many dents in it you wouldn't believe. But he never laid a finger on Kim.